Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Mastered the Mera Mera no Mi. Imagine Izuku Midoriya, wielding the devastating power of Ace's Mera Mera no Mi. How would his fights change? What would a firebending hero look like in My Hero Academia? This isn't just a fantasy. We're diving deep into the explosive possibilities of Deku as a flame fruit user and how it rewrites everything you thought you knew. If you guys enjoy this What If, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other What Ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The journey from the flood zone to the USJ Central Plaza felt like traversing a war zone. Smoke columns rose from various disaster simulation areas, the acrid smell of burning infrastructure mixing with ozone from electrical quirks and the metallic tang of blood. As Izuku's group moved through the facility's connector tunnels, the sounds of combat grew progressively more intense, not the controlled chaos of training exercises, but the desperate fury of life-or-death battles. There, Tsu pointed toward an observation window that overlooked the main plaza. "I can see some of our classmates." Through the reinforced glass, they could make out scattered figures locked in combat across the central area. Bakugo was airborne, his explosions painting streaks of light across the smoky air as he engaged multiple villains simultaneously. Kirishima had hardened his entire body into a living shield, protecting what looked like injured classmates from a coordinated assault. But it was the scene at the plaza's center that made Izuku's blood run cold. Aizawa lay motionless on the concrete, his signature capture weapon torn and bloodied around him. Standing over their teacher's prone form was the pale-haired villain, Shigaraki, while the massive Nomu creature waited nearby like a living weapon, prepared to unleash destruction on command. Eraserheads down, Todoroki observed with grim precision. Without his quirk suppression, the villains have full access to their abilities. "And that thing," Mineta whispered, pointing at the Nomu with a trembling finger. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Izuku studied the creature with his analytical mind, cataloging details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The exposed brain tissue suggested some kind of biological enhancement or modification. The hulking musculature was beyond anything normal human genetics could achieve. Most disturbing of all, the creature radiated power on a scale that made his enhanced senses prickle with instinctive fear. "It's artificial," he realized aloud. "Some kind of engineered being designed for combat. Look at the way it moves, too perfect, too controlled. That's not natural behavior." "Engineered how?" Todoroki asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really want to know the answer. Before Izuku could speculate further, a familiar voice boomed across the USJ with enough force to shake dust from the ceiling structures. "I am here." All Might burst through the facility's main entrance like a force of nature made manifest, his muscle form radiating power and authority even in the smoky, chaotic environment. But Izuku's enhanced perception caught details his classmates would miss. The slight stiffness in his mentor's movements, the barely perceptible tremor in his left hand, the way his smile seemed forced rather than natural. "He's already weakened," Izuku realized with growing alarm. "How long has he been in muscle form today? How much time does he have left?" "Fear not, students," All Might declared as he surveyed the battlefield. "For I am here." The effect on both heroes and villains was immediate and dramatic. The scattered students rallied visibly, their desperate defensive actions becoming coordinated counterattacks. Conversely, several of the lesser villains began retreating toward the facility's exits, clearly unwilling to face the symbol of peace in direct combat. But Shigaraki's reaction was pure childish delight. "All Might," the pale villain called out, his voice carrying across the plaza with manic enthusiasm. "You finally came to play. I was getting so bored waiting for the final boss." The Nomu shifted beside him, its movements becoming predatory as it focused on the newly arrived hero. Whatever the creature was, it had clearly been designed with All Might specifically in mind. "Release the students," All Might commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Your quarrel is with me, but they're part of the game," Shigaraki protested, gesturing toward the injured teenagers scattered across the plaza. "Besides, I want to see how the symbol of peace performs under pressure." He raised his hand toward Aizawa's motionless form, 5 fingers spread wide. Whatever quirk he possessed, the threat was clear: surrender or watch innocent people die. That's when Izuku made a decision that would change everything. "Everyone stay here," he said quietly, moving toward the observation window. "I'm going to help." "Are you insane?" Mineta squeaked. "You can barely stand up after what you did in the flood zone." And you'll be fighting professional villains, Todoroki added, though his tone held more concern than criticism. Whatever your quirk really is, you're still just a student. Izuku turned to meet his classmates' worried gazes, letting them see the determination that had carried him from powerless nobody to UA student. Sometimes being a student doesn't matter. Sometimes you just have to be a hero. Before anyone could stop him, he pressed both palms against the reinforced glass and began applying precise thermal stress. The window didn't shatter. It simply separated along carefully created fracture lines that allowed him to step through without generating noise or debris. The drop to the plaza floor was nearly 3 stories, but months of training with All Might had prepared him for far worse. He landed in a controlled roll that dispersed the impact force, coming up in a combat crouch with flames already dancing around his hands. The first villain to notice him was some kind of mutant type with multiple arms and what appeared to be metallic skin. The creature charged with surprising speed, clearly intending to overwhelm him through brute force. Heat Lance, the superheated beam that erupted from Izuku's palm, punched through the villain's metallic hide like paper, dropping him instantly. But the attack also announced his presence to every combatant in the plaza. "Another student," Shigaraki called out with delighted laughter. "This just keeps getting better. Nomu, kill the fire brat first. I want All Might to watch his precious students die." The creature's response was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment it was standing beside Shigaraki, the next it was airborne and closing on Izuku's position with speed that defied its massive size. Too fast, Izuku realized as the Nomu's fist descended toward his head. I can't dodge in time, but he didn't need to dodge. Thermal barrier, the wall of superheated air that erupted around him, was the most concentrated heat he'd ever generated, hot enough to turn sand into glass and metal into vapor. The Nomu's punch connected with the barrier and simply stopped. For a moment that felt like an eternity, unstoppable force met immovable object as the creature's enhanced strength collided with thermal energy that operated on principles beyond normal physics. The air itself screamed with displaced energy, and Izuku felt his devil fruit power being pushed to limits he'd never tested. Then the Nomu was thrown backward, its enhanced flesh bearing burn marks that suggested even its artificial durability had limits. "Impossible," Shigaraki's voice cracked with rage and confusion. "That thing was designed to be immune to physical damage. How did some student?" His words were cut off as All Might entered the battle with devastating force. Detroit Smash, the punch that followed, was vintage All Might, a perfect demonstration of overwhelming power applied with surgical precision. But instead of sending the Nomu flying across the plaza, the creature absorbed the impact and immediately counterattacked with its own devastating strike. It's not just durable, Izuku realized as he watched the two titans clash. It's specifically designed to counter All Might's fighting style. The battle that followed was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. All Might and the Nomu traded blows that shattered concrete and sent shockwaves through the facility's structural supports. Each impact echoed like thunder, and the sheer scale of their conflict made every other fight in the plaza seem insignificant by comparison. But Izuku could see what others couldn't. All Might was losing, not through lack of skill or determination, but through the simple mathematics of endurance. Every exchange cost him precious seconds of his muscle form, while the Nomu showed no signs of fatigue or degradation. Worse, the creature was clearly holding back, fighting with enough restraint to prolong the battle rather than end it quickly. They want to study him, Izuku realized with growing horror. This isn't about killing All Might, it's about understanding his limitations. Around the plaza, his classmates were holding their own against the remaining villains, but they were running out of stamina and options. Bakugo's explosions were becoming smaller and less frequent. Kirishima's hardening was showing cracks. Even Todoroki's ice constructions seemed less stable than usual. If something didn't change soon, they were all going to die. That's when Izuku stopped holding back. "Everyone clear the center plaza," he shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield with surprising authority. "Get as far away as possible now." The tone brooked no argument. Students and villains alike found themselves instinctively obeying, retreating toward the facility's edges as something fundamental shifted in the air around them. Izuku stood in the center of the plaza, flames beginning to erupt from every inch of his body as he called upon power that went far beyond anything he'd demonstrated before. This wasn't thermal manipulation or controlled fire generation. This was the raw essence of what had transformed him on that beach 10 months ago. Inferno Domain, the technique had no precedent in quirk theory because it operated on principles that normal abilities couldn't access. Instead of generating fire, Izuku became fire, his consciousness expanding to encompass a sphere of thermal energy that covered the entire central plaza. Everything within that sphere became subject to his will. The concrete beneath the Nomu's feet suddenly spiked to temperatures that turned stone into lava. The air around Shigaraki became too hot to breathe without causing severe lung damage. Metal fixtures throughout the area began glowing cherry red as their molecular structure destabilized under impossible thermal stress. But most importantly, the space around All Might became a perfect thermal environment, warm enough to support his metabolism without overheating, with carefully controlled air currents that enhanced his movement speed and striking power. "What is this?" Shigaraki gasped, his pale skin already showing signs of heat exposure. "This heat, it's everywhere at once." The Nomu, despite its enhanced durability, was clearly struggling with the environmental shift. Its movements became sluggish as its artificial biology attempted to cope with temperatures that exceeded its design parameters. All Might, conversely, seemed to grow stronger. "Young Midoriya," he called out, his voice carrying both gratitude and concern. "This power, be careful not to overextend yourself." But Izuku was beyond hearing warnings. The Devil Fruit ability was operating on autopilot now, responding to his desperate need to protect everyone he cared about. Through his expanded thermal awareness, he could perceive every living being in the facility, his classmates huddled at safe distances, teachers fighting elsewhere in the complex, villains struggling to cope with his environmental manipulation. "I can end this," he realized with crystal clarity. "I can heat the air in their lungs until they pass out from thermal shock. I can melt their weapons and equipment. I can create thermal barriers that make movement impossible." The temptation was overwhelming. With this level of power, he could neutralize every threat in the facility within minutes. No more danger to his friends, no more risk to All Might, no more uncertainty about the outcome. But that would also mean revealing exactly what he'd become. Control, he reminded himself, pulling back from the edge of total domination. Heroes protect, they don't conquer. Instead of ending the battle through overwhelming force, he focused his expanded abilities on tactical support. Thermal barriers that guided villain movements into disadvantageous positions. Selective heating that disabled weapons without harming their wielders. Environmental manipulation that gave his allies perfect positioning for their own attacks. The tide of battle turned immediately. All Might's enhanced performance in the optimal thermal environment allowed him to finally overwhelm the Nomu's defenses. A perfectly executed combination of punches, made possible by Izuku's environmental support, sent the creature crashing through multiple structural barriers before embedding it in the facility's far wall. Simultaneously, the remaining villains found themselves unable to maintain effective combat in the thermally controlled environment. Weapons overheated and became unusable. Footing became unreliable as selective heating created thermal expansion in the ground. Visibility dropped as carefully controlled steam obscured sight lines at tactical moments. Within minutes, the USJ Central Plaza was clear of active threats. "Impossible," Shigaraki whispered, staring at the defeated Nomu with expressions of shock and rage. "That thing was supposed to be perfect. It was designed to kill All Might." "Your mistake," All Might replied, his voice carrying renewed strength, "was assuming I would face it alone." But even as victory seemed assured, Izuku felt his expanded consciousness beginning to falter. The Inferno Domain technique was beyond anything his body was designed to handle, and the strain was accumulating like compound interest. "I need to shut this down," he realized as his vision began to blur. "Before I collapse completely." Carefully, precisely, he began pulling his thermal control back to normal human ranges. The superheated air cooled to breathable temperatures. The glowing metal fixtures darkened as they shed excess thermal energy. The impossible sphere of influence that had encompassed the entire plaza contracted back to the area immediately around his exhausted form. When the domain fully collapsed, Izuku collapsed with it. He barely registered hitting the concrete, his consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Through fading awareness, he could hear voices calling his name, footsteps running toward his position, the distant sound of sirens as professional heroes finally arrived at the scene. But there was another sound that sent ice through his failing consciousness, Shigaraki's voice, filled with fascination rather than defeat. "That power," the pale villain was saying to someone. "Did you see that power? It wasn't just fire, it was something else entirely. Something familiar." "The boy is unconscious," came another voice, the warp villain who had initiated the attack. "We should retreat before the other pro-heroes arrive." No, Shigaraki replied, his tone carrying the petulant certainty of a child fixated on a new toy. We're taking him with us. Master will want to study this personally. No, Izuku tried to say, but his voice wouldn't work. His devil fruit power was completely depleted, leaving him as helpless as he'd been before eating that impossible fruit. But before the villains could act on their intentions, new voices filled the plaza, professional heroes responding to the emergency call. The distinctive whoosh of air pressure manipulation meant Kamui Woods was present. The rumble of earth moving suggested Cementos had arrived. Most importantly, the commanding tone of coordinated response indicated that multiple agencies were finally taking control of the situation. Retreat, the warp villain said urgently. We've learned what we came for, but the Fire Boy will be studied another time. Survival takes priority over curiosity. The last thing Izuku heard before unconsciousness claimed him was the sound of spatial distortion as the League of Villains withdrew from their failed attack. But their retreat felt more like a strategic withdrawal than actual defeat. They had come to test All Might's limits and learned far more than they'd bargained for. They had discovered the existence of a student whose power defied conventional understanding. And in the shadows of the criminal underworld, that information was worth more than any victory they might have achieved through direct confrontation. Izuku woke up in the UA infirmary 3 hours later, his body aching like he'd been hit by a truck filled with molten metal. Recovery Girl's healing had mended the physical damage from overextending his devil fruit power, but the mental exhaustion lingered like a persistent fog. "Ah, you're awake," came All Might's familiar voice from beside his bed. The skeletal hero was slumped in a visitor's chair, looking as exhausted as Izuku felt. "How are you feeling, young man?" "Like I just learned why they call it devil fruit," Izuku croaked, his throat raw from the thermal energy he'd channeled. "Did everyone make it out okay?" "All students accounted for and receiving treatment as needed," All Might confirmed. "Aizawa is in more serious condition, but Recovery Girl expects a full recovery. Thanks largely to your intervention, I suspect." The weight of what had happened was beginning to settle on Izuku's shoulders like a lead blanket. "I revealed too much, didn't I?" "That final technique was necessary to save lives," All Might replied firmly. "But yes, it will raise questions. Several of your classmates are asking how you generated that much thermal energy without dying from heat exhaustion. The investigation team is requesting detailed statements about your quirk's capabilities." And somewhere out there, Izuku thought grimly, villains are comparing notes about the boy whose power felt familiar to them. "There's something else," All Might continued, his voice growing grave. "During the battle, Shigaraki made several comments suggesting they have inside information about UA schedules and security protocols. This wasn't a random attack, it was specifically planned to occur when I would be present. The implications were staggering. If the League of Villains had access to UA's internal information, then nowhere was truly safe. Worse, if they'd been studying All Might's patterns and limitations, today's attack was just the beginning of something much larger. "They'll be back," Izuku said quietly. "Undoubtedly. But next time we'll be better prepared." All Might leaned forward, his sunken eyes intense with determination. "Which brings me to an important point, your training needs to accelerate. What you did today was incredible, but it also marked you as a priority target for villain organizations." Before Izuku could ask what that meant, the infirmary door burst open to admit what looked like half of Class 1A. Uraraka led the charge, her face streaked with tears of relief as she rushed toward his bed. "Midoriya, thank goodness you're okay." She stopped short of actually hugging him, apparently remembering they were still getting to know each other. "When you collapsed after that amazing technique, we were so scared." "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," Ida added, his usual formal composure cracked by genuine emotion. "The way you controlled the entire environment simultaneously, it defied every principle of quirk theory I know. How did you do it?" Yaoyorozu asked with scientific curiosity. "The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for a single person to generate, regardless of their quirk type." But it was Todoroki's quiet voice that cut through the excited chatter. "That wasn't a normal fire quirk, was it?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and unavoidable. Izuku met his classmate's heterochromatic gaze and saw not accusation, but understanding. Whatever Todoroki suspected, he wasn't planning to expose it publicly. "My quirk is complicated," Izuku said carefully. "I'm still learning about its full capabilities myself." "Complicated how?" Bakugo's voice came from the doorway, where he stood with arms crossed and expression thunderous. "Because that bullshit you pulled in there," That wasn't late manifestation of anything normal. The explosive blonde stepped into the room, his crimson eyes fixed on Izuku with laser intensity. I've known you since we were kids, Deku. I've seen every fire quirk in the databases, studied every thermal manipulation technique in existence. What you did today doesn't exist in any official record. Here it comes, Izuku thought as his classmates looked between him and Bakugo with growing tension. The confrontation I've been dreading since this all started. So I'm asking one more time, Bakugo continued, his voice deadly quiet. What the fuck are you really? Before Izuku could formulate any kind of response, All Might rose from his chair with surprising authority for someone in his weakened state. That's enough, the skeletal hero said firmly. Young Midoriya risked his life to save all of you today. Whatever questions you have about his abilities can wait until he's recovered from the ordeal. But, Bakugo started, no buts. Everyone out except medical personnel. That's an order from a faculty member. The students filed out reluctantly, though several cast worried or suspicious glances back at Izuku's bed. When the room was finally empty except for All Might and Recovery Girl, the weight of secrets felt heavier than ever. They're not going to let this go, Izuku said quietly. No, they're not, All Might agreed. Which means we need to decide how much truth to reveal, and to whom. Your cover story is no longer sufficient for the level of scrutiny you'll face. Recovery Girl looked up from her medical charts with knowing eyes. Whatever the boy's secret is, it's his to tell when he's ready. My job is healing, not investigation. But as Izuku stared at the ceiling of the infirmary, he knew that ready or not, the time for secrets was rapidly running out. Today's battle had marked him as someone of interest to villains, heroes, and fellow students alike. The question was whether he could control the revelation of his truth, or whether circumstances would force it into the open regardless of his preferences. Outside the infirmary windows, the sun was setting over UA's campus, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of flames dancing on a distant beach. Somewhere in that fading light, the League of Villains was planning their next move, armed with knowledge about a student whose power had felt strangely familiar. The war for his future, and possibly the future of hero society itself, had officially begun. And Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had eaten impossible fruit and gained impossible power, stood at the center of it all. 2 weeks after the USJ incident, Izuku discovered that surviving a villain attack was somehow easier than surviving the aftermath. Young Midoriya, focus on precision over power, All Might called from across the beach training ground. The sports festival will be broadcast to the entire nation. Every technique you use will be analyzed by pro heroes, villain organizations, and quirk researchers. Izuku nodded, sweat streaming down his face as he attempted his latest technique development. Instead of the overwhelming thermal domain he'd used against the League of Villains, he was working to create something that looked impressive, but operated within believable parameters for a fire quirk. Flame burst, he called out, projecting controlled explosions of fire in rapid succession toward a series of metal targets All Might had set up along the shoreline. Each burst was carefully calculated, hot enough to melt steel, precise enough to hit targets the size of dinner plates, but not so overwhelming that it defied conventional understanding of thermal manipulation. The technique looked like an advanced application of fire generation rather than the reality-bending power of devil fruit abilities. Better, All Might observed as the last target dissolved into molten slag. That reads as an exceptionally strong fire quirk rather than something beyond normal human capabilities. What about mobility? Izuku took a deep breath and activated his next experimental technique. Phoenix Wing, jets of flame erupted from strategic points along his arms and back, not unlike the wing patterns of a great bird. The thermal thrust provided genuine flight capability while maintaining the visual metaphor of a phoenix rising from flames. More importantly, it looked like something a gifted fire user might develop through creative application of their abilities. He soared over the beach for nearly a minute, demonstrating aerial maneuverability that would be crucial in the sports festival's obstacle courses and combat scenarios. When he landed gracefully on the sand, All Might was nodding approvingly. Excellent. That technique provides tactical advantages while maintaining plausible deniability about your true power source. The skeletal hero consulted his training notes. What about defensive applications? I've been working on something, Izuku replied, moving to a clear area of sand. Heat haze. Instead of generating visible flames, he began superheating the air around himself in specific patterns. The result was a zone of thermal distortion that bent light and sound waves, making his exact position difficult to determine. To outside observers, he would appear to flicker and shift like a mirage, making accurate targeting nearly impossible. Remarkable, All Might breathed. Optical camouflage through thermal manipulation. That's the kind of creative application that separates good heroes from great ones. But even as pride swelled in Izuku's chest, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope over an abyss. Every technique he developed had to thread the needle between effectiveness and explainability, power and plausibility. All might, he said hesitantly. What if someone figures it out? What if the techniques aren't convincing enough? His mentor was quiet for a long moment, his sunken eyes focused on the horizon where cargo ships moved like distant toys. Then we deal with that challenge when it comes. But young man, hiding your true nature isn't sustainable forever. Eventually, you'll need to decide whether the secret is worth the limitations it imposes. The conversation was interrupted by Izuku's phone buzzing with a message from his mother. Don't forget the Todoroki boy is coming for dinner tonight. I'm making extra katsudon. Right. In the aftermath of USJ, Shoto Todoroki had somehow maneuvered himself into Izuku's social circle with the persistence of a tactical missile. What had started as casual questions about fire techniques had evolved into study sessions, then training partnerships, and now apparently family dinners. Your classmate is quite persistent, All Might noted with amusement. Most students would accept it's complicated as sufficient explanation for unusual quirk manifestations. Todoroki isn't most students, Izuku replied grimly. His father is Endeavor, he's been around fire quirks his entire life. If anyone would notice inconsistencies in my story, then make sure there are no inconsistencies to notice. Your techniques today were excellent examples of advanced thermal manipulation. Focus on perfecting those rather than worrying about hypothetical problems. As they wrapped up the training session, Izuku found his mind drifting to the broader implications of his situation. The sports festival was less than 2 weeks away, and unlike previous school events, this one would be impossible to keep secret. Every major pro hero would be watching. Television coverage would reach millions of viewers. Worst of all, the League of Villains would certainly be paying attention to the student whose power had felt familiar to them. No pressure at all, he thought as he gathered his training gear. The train ride home gave him time to process the challenges ahead. His phone was filled with messages from classmates, some offering encouragement, others asking about training tips, and a few that carried undertones of suspicion he pretended not to notice. Kirishima, dude, your fire techniques are amazing. Think you could show me some heat-resistant training methods? Yayorzu, I've been researching thermal manipulation theory. Would you be interested in discussing the theoretical energy requirements for your techniques? Bakugo, still don't believe your bullshit story. Sports Festival is going to expose you for what you really are. The last message sent a chill through Izuku despite the warm evening air. Bakugo's suspicion was becoming increasingly problematic. And unlike Todoroki's scientific curiosity, it came with years of personal history and emotional investment. His apartment building felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of training and the weight of secrets. But even that comfort was complicated by the knowledge that Todoroki would be joining them for dinner, another opportunity for probing questions disguised as friendly conversation. I'm home, he called out, slipping off his shoes in the Genkin. Perfect timing, his mother replied from the kitchen. Your friend will be here in 20 minutes. How was training? Productive, Izuku replied carefully. We're making good progress on techniques for the sports festival. Inko appeared in the hallway, her expression mixing maternal pride with worry that had become increasingly familiar since the USJ incident. Are you sure you're ready for this, being on national television with all that scrutiny? I have to be, Izuku said simply. This is what I've been working toward since I started at UA. Besides, it's not like I can opt out. The sports festival is mandatory for all first-year hero course students. What he didn't say was that backing down now would raise even more questions than performing would. A student who had demonstrated the power to single-handedly neutralize professional villains couldn't suddenly claim to be too weak or unprepared for a school competition. The doorbell rang exactly 20 minutes later, with the punctuality that characterized everything about Shoto Todoroki. When Inko opened the door, she was greeted by a polite bow and a small gift bag containing what appeared to be expensive tea. Thank you for inviting me to your home, Todoroki said formally. My apologies for any inconvenience. No inconvenience at all, Inko replied warmly, ushering him inside. It's wonderful to meet one of Izuku's classmates. He's told me so much about you. Not nearly enough, Izuku thought as he watched Todoroki navigate their small apartment with careful attention to detail. Those heterochromatic eyes were cataloging everything: family photos, book collections, any clues that might shed light on his host's mysterious abilities. Dinner was simultaneously pleasant and nerve-wracking. Todoroki was genuinely good company when he wasn't probing for secrets, sharing stories about UA that made Inko laugh and asking thoughtful questions about her work as a graphic designer. But underneath the friendly conversation, Izuku could sense the analytical mind at work. "Mrs. Midoriya," Todoroki said during a lull in conversation. Midoriya mentioned that his quirk manifested late. That must have been a remarkable experience, suddenly discovering abilities that powerful. "Oh, it certainly was," Inko replied, her smile becoming slightly strained. "Very unexpected. But we're so proud of how hard he's worked to develop his skills. I can imagine. The level of control he demonstrated during the USJ incident was extraordinary for someone with recently manifested abilities." Todoroki's tone was casual, but his eyes never left Inko's face. Most fire quirk users require years to develop that kind of environmental manipulation. He's fishing, Izuku realized, using Mom's emotional responses to gauge how much of our story is actually true. "Well, Izuku has always been determined when he sets his mind to something," Inko said carefully. "Ever since he was little, he's had this incredible ability to analyze and understand how things work. Analytical thinking is crucial for advanced quirk development," Todoroki agreed. "Though I'm curious, were there any signs before the manifestation? Sometimes late-blooming quirks show subtle indicators years in advance." The question was a trap, beautifully constructed and casually delivered. If Inko said yes, Todoroki would want details that didn't exist. If she said no, it would reinforce his suspicion that their timeline was fabricated. "Nothing obvious," Izuku interjected before his mother could answer. "Just the usual childhood dreams about having powers someday." Todoroki turned his attention to Izuku with laser focus. And when it finally manifested, what was the trigger? Late-onset quirks usually have specific catalysts: emotional trauma, physical stress, chemical exposure. "Emotional stress," Izuku replied, which was technically accurate. "A very bad day at school." "I see." Todoroki's expression revealed nothing, but something in his tone suggested he was filing that information away for future consideration. And the first manifestation took the form of accidental fire generation during a panic attack, Izuku said, drawing on the carefully rehearsed story he'd developed with All Might. "Singed my school uniform and set off the smoke detector in our apartment." All true in the strictest sense. He'd simply omitted the part about eating impossible fruit that had washed up on a beach. "Fascinating," Todoroki murmured. "Most fire quirks begin with much smaller manifestations, brief sparks, minor temperature increases. Full flame generation suggests either exceptional potential or," he trailed off, apparently thinking better of finishing that sentence. "Or what?" Inko asked with the sharp edge that crept into her voice when someone seemed to be criticizing her son. "Or exceptional circumstances surrounding the manifestation," Todoroki replied diplomatically. "Some researchers theorize that late-onset quirks develop more rapidly because they're responding to accumulated psychological or physiological pressure." The conversation moved on to safer topics after that, but Izuku remained tense throughout the rest of the evening. When Todoroki finally left with polite thanks and another formal bow, both Midoriyas felt drained by the experience. "He's a nice boy," Inko said as they cleaned up the dinner dishes. "But he asks a lot of questions." "He's suspicious," Izuku replied bluntly. "About my quirk, about our story, about everything. I think he knows something isn't adding up." "What are you going to do?" Izuku considered the question as he dried their plates. "Keep being consistent with our cover story. Hope that my performance in the sports festival is convincing enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing too much." But privately, he was beginning to wonder if that approach was sustainable. Todoroki wasn't the only one asking pointed questions. Several of his classmates had made comments about his unusual techniques. Even some of the teachers seemed to be paying him closer attention than normal. The USJ changed everything, he realized as he prepared for bed. "I can't go back to being just another student with an interesting quirk. Too many people saw too much." His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Impressive display at the training facility. We look forward to seeing what you can do on a larger stage." A friend, the blood drained from Izuku's face as he stared at the screen. Someone was watching him, someone connected to the League of Villains who had access to his personal contact information. The message was a reminder that his secrets had consequences beyond just social awkwardness or academic scrutiny. He showed the message to his mother, watching her face pale as the implications sank in. "Should we call the police?" she asked quietly. "And tell them what? That I received a vaguely threatening text from someone who might be connected to villains but hasn't actually threatened anything specific." Izuku shook his head. "We need more evidence before involving authorities." What he didn't say was that involving police would inevitably lead to questions about why villains were interested in him specifically. Questions that would eventually circle back to his unusual abilities and the inconsistencies in his cover story. 2 weeks, he thought as he finally tried to fall asleep. 2 weeks until the sports festival, and everything becomes public. The next morning brought news that made his situation even more complicated. Principal Nezu's announcement during homeroom carried implications that sent ripples of excitement and anxiety through Class 1A. Due to increased security concerns following recent events, Nezu said via video conference, this year's sports festival will feature enhanced safety protocols and expanded professional hero participation. Additionally, students who demonstrate exceptional performance may be offered early provisional licenses for hero work. Provisional licenses. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Official recognition as a hero in training would open doors that had been closed to him his entire life. But it would also mean increased scrutiny, background investigations, and official documentation of his abilities. "This is our chance," Iida said with his characteristic intensity. "An opportunity to prove we belong among the next generation of professional heroes. More importantly," Yaoyorozu added, "it's a chance to show that Class 1A isn't defined by the villain attack. We're stronger than they expected." But it was Bakugo's reaction that sent ice through Izuku's veins. The explosive blonde was staring directly at him with an expression of savage anticipation. 2 weeks, Bakugo said quietly, echoing Izuku's own thoughts. 2 weeks until everyone sees exactly what you really are. During lunch, Todoroki approached Izuku's table with the directness that characterized all his interactions. "I want to train with you," he said without preamble. "Fire technique development for the sports festival." "I appreciate the offer," Izuku replied carefully, "but I'm already working with a training partner." "All might," Todoroki said, and it wasn't a question. "I noticed him observing your techniques during combat training. Unusual for a teacher to provide individual instruction to that extent." "How much does he know?" Izuku wondered, fighting to keep his expression neutral. "He's been helpful with my late manifestation adjustment issues." "I'm sure he has." Todoroki's tone was neutral, but his eyes held depths of calculation that made Izuku uncomfortable. Still, training with someone who shares your power type might provide different insights. Fire users face unique challenges that other heroes don't fully understand. The offer was reasonable on the surface, but Izuku sensed the underlying agenda. Todoroki wanted extended observation time, opportunities to study his techniques up close and identify inconsistencies that casual encounters might miss. "Maybe after the sports festival," Izuku hedged. "I'm pretty committed to my current training schedule right now." "Of course." Todoroki's smile was polite but didn't reach his eyes. "Though I should mention, my father is planning to attend the festival this year. He's expressed interest in observing the performance of other fire-type students." The casual mention of endeavor felt like a threat wrapped in friendly conversation. The number 2 hero would be watching, analyzing, comparing Izuku's techniques to everything he knew about fire-based abilities. If anyone could spot the supernatural elements of devil fruit power masquerading as a quirk. "That's nice," Izuku managed to say. "I hope I don't disappoint." "I doubt you will," Todoroki replied with certainty that was somehow more unsettling than skepticism would have been. That evening, Izuku met All Might at their usual training location with a head full of worries and a growing sense that events were spiraling beyond his control. "The pressure is getting to you," All Might observed as they began their warm-up exercises. "I can see it in your stance, your breathing, the way you're holding tension in your shoulders." Todoroki suspects something. Bakugo knows something's wrong. Now Endeavor is going to be watching the sports festival personally. Izuku's flames flickered erratically around his hands as his emotional state affected his power control. "I feel like I'm being surrounded by people who want to expose my secret." "Then perhaps," All Might said quietly, "it's time to consider whether that secret is worth the stress it's causing you." The suggestion hit Izuku like a physical blow. "You think I should tell people the truth about the devil fruit? I think you should consider what you're actually protecting by maintaining the lie," All Might replied. your safety, your privacy, your ability to help others. Or just your comfort with avoiding difficult conversations. Izuku was quiet for a long moment, flames dancing around his hands as he processed his mentor's words. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure anymore. The secret had started as protection, but it was becoming a cage that limited how much of himself he could reveal. "The villains already know something unusual about my power," he said eventually. "They're watching, waiting to see what I do next, if I'm going to be a target regardless. Then you might as well be a target with the full support and protection that comes from honest relationships with allies," All Might finished. "Young man, secrets are tools. Like any tool, they're only valuable when they serve your actual goals." As they moved into advanced technique practice, Izuku found himself thinking about revelation versus concealment, truth versus safety, the price of hiding versus the risk of exposure. 2 weeks, he reminded himself as flames danced between his fingers with increasing precision and power. 2 weeks to decide not just how to perform, but who to be when the whole world is watching. The sports festival would be more than just a competition. It would be his public debut as the hero he was becoming, secrets and all. The only question was whether that hero would still be hiding behind lies, or finally ready to face the truth about what he'd become on a garbage-strewn beach 10 months ago. The flames in his chest pulsed with determination as he practiced techniques that might save lives or expose everything he'd worked to protect. Time to decide what kind of hero I really want to be. The roar of 80,000 spectators was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. Standing in the competitor staging area beneath UA's massive stadium, he could feel the sound as a physical force, waves of excitement and anticipation that seemed to make the very air vibrate with energy. Through the concrete walls, muffled announcements and cheering created a constant rumble that reminded him of distant thunder. "Holy crap," Kaminari breathed beside him, his usually confident demeanor cracked by the sheer scale of the event. "There are so many people up there. What if I mess up? What if everyone sees me fail on national television?" "Then you get back up and try again," Izuku replied, though his own nerves were singing with tension. That's what heroes do. Around them, the other first-year students were dealing with pre-competition anxiety in various ways. Bakugo was doing explosive warm-up exercises that filled their section with smoke and the sharp scent of nitroglycerin. Todoroki stood motionless against a wall, ice crystals forming and melting around his right side as he practiced temperature control. Yaoyorozu was creating and dismissing small objects with machine-like precision, her analytical mind no doubt running through contingency plans. But it was the attention Izuku was receiving that made his stomach clench with worry. Too many of his classmates were stealing glances his way, their expressions mixing curiosity with something approaching awe. Word of his performance during the USJ incident had spread throughout the school despite official attempts to keep details classified. Midoriya, Ida appeared beside him with characteristic punctuality, his expression serious. "I wanted to wish you luck, but also to say that I'll be giving my absolute best effort today. Our friendship won't make me hold back." "I wouldn't want you to," Izuku replied honestly. "The sports festival is too important for anyone to pull their punches." What he didn't say was that holding back was the last thing on his mind. 10 months of training with All Might had prepared him for this moment, and the devil fruit power burning in his chest was eager to finally show the world what it could accomplish. "Just remember the plan," he told himself as Present Mike's amplified voice began echoing through the stadium above. Impressive but explainable. Advanced thermal manipulation, not reality-bending supernatural power. The march into the arena was a sensory overload. Sunlight blazed down from a perfect blue sky as they emerged from the tunnels onto the stadium floor, where a massive obstacle course stretched into the distance like a fevered dream of heroic challenges. The crowd's roar intensified until it became a wall of sound that seemed to press against them from all directions. Cameras tracked their movement from dozens of angles, broadcasting every expression and gesture to millions of viewers across Japan and beyond. In the VIP section, Izuku could make out the distinctive figures of professional heroes, including Endeavor's flame-wreathed silhouette and the unmistakable presence of All Might in his muscle form. No pressure at all, Izuku thought wryly as they assembled in the center of the arena for opening ceremonies. Present Mike's introduction was characteristically explosive, his voice somehow cutting through the crowd noise with practiced precision. "Welcome, sports fans, to the most anticipated event of the academic year, UA High School's Sports Festival, where tomorrow's heroes prove they have what it takes today." The student oath was delivered by Bakugo with his typical abrasive confidence, earning a mixture of boos and cheers from the audience. When he declared his intention to take first place regardless of competition, Izuku couldn't help but admire the sheer audacity of publicly throwing down that kind of gauntlet. Classic Kacchan, he thought with dark amusement. Never met a challenge he couldn't make personal. Now then, Present Mike continued as Bakugo returned to the group. Let's get this party started with our first event, the obstacle race. All students will compete simultaneously in a 4-kilometer course designed to test speed, strength, intelligence, and adaptability. First place gets 10 million points, second place gets 1,000 points, and so on down the line. A holographic display materialized above the arena, showing an aerial view of the obstacle course that made Izuku's analytical mind immediately shift into strategic mode. 3 distinct sections were visible: a narrow passage that would create bottlenecks and force direct competition, a chasm spanned by what looked like massive mechanical obstacles, and a final stretch that appeared to be a minefield of some kind. Classic hero course design, he analyzed rapidly. Multiple choke points to test different skill sets, environmental hazards that require creative problem-solving, and a finale that rewards tactical thinking over raw speed. Competitors, take your positions, Present Mike announced as the starting line materialized, a simple white stripe painted across the arena floor, with the course entrance looming ahead like the mouth of a mechanical beast. The first section was immediately obvious as a crowd control mechanism. The passage was barely wide enough for a dozen people to run side by side, meaning nearly 200 students would be forced into a massive bottleneck within the first few meters of the race. Izuku positioned himself carefully in the middle of the pack, close enough to the front to avoid the worst of the inevitable pileup, but not so far forward that he'd be targeted by competitors looking to eliminate early leaders. Around him, his classmates were making similar calculations based on their individual strengths and strategies. On your mark, Present Mike's voice echoed across the arena. Get set. The moment of silence that followed was electric with potential energy. 200 students crouched in starting positions, quirks beginning to activate as everyone prepared for the chaos that was about to unfold. Go! The starting guns report was immediately drowned out by the sound of nearly 200 superpowered teenagers launching themselves toward the narrow entrance. The bottleneck effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Students crashed into each other, quirks activated in desperate attempts to gain advantage, and the orderly race devolved into a massive traffic jam within seconds. Izuku had been expecting this. Phoenix Wing, flames erupted from strategic points along his arms and back, creating the distinctive wing pattern he'd perfected during training. Instead of fighting through the ground-level chaos, he launched himself skyward on jets of controlled fire, soaring over the heads of his struggling competitors. The technique drew immediate attention from both the crowd and the commentary booth. Incredible, Present Mike's voice boomed across the stadium. Class 1A's Midoriya is taking to the sky with what appears to be flame-powered flight. That's some serious creative quirk application. But Izuku wasn't the only one thinking three-dimensionally. Todoroki was using his ice creation to build an elevated pathway over the bottleneck, while several students with mobility quirks were finding their own ways around the ground-level congestion. The real race was happening above the crowd, between competitors skilled enough to bypass the obvious trap. The first major obstacle became visible as they cleared the initial passage. A sprawling complex of massive robotic enemies borrowed from the entrance exam, positioned to block the most direct routes through the course. 0-point robots, the giant mechanical beasts that served as mobile obstacles rather than targets. Perfect, Izuku thought as he analyzed the positions and movement patterns of the robotic guardians. Time to show what advanced thermal manipulation can really accomplish. Instead of trying to fight or evade the robots, he began superheating the air around their joints and mechanical linkages. The technique was invisible to outside observers but devastatingly effective. Thermal expansion caused critical components to seize and bind, turning the massive guardians into harmless statues within moments. What an interesting strategy, Present Mike called out as Izuku flew past the immobilized robots. Rather than engaging the obstacles directly, Midoriya appears to be using his fire quirk to disable their mechanical systems. That's the kind of tactical thinking that separates good heroes from great ones. Behind him, Izuku could hear the sounds of other students dealing with the robot obstacle in more conventional ways. Explosions from Bakugo's direct assault approach, the grinding of metal as Kirishima powered through with brute force, and the distinctive sound of Todoroki's ice creation providing alternate routes around the mechanical guardians. But his lead was temporary. The course's second major section was designed to neutralize aerial advantages and force competitors back into direct competition, the ravine. Stretching across their path was a chasm easily 100 meters wide, spanned by massive cables from which dangled platforms, ropes, and what appeared to be deliberately unstable crossing points. The challenge was clear. Navigate the obstacle while other competitors tried to knock you off course, all while maintaining enough speed to stay competitive in the overall race. Izuku's flame-powered flight should have made this section trivial, but the course designers had anticipated that advantage. Anti-air defenses in the form of automated targeting systems tracked flying competitors, launching foam projectiles designed to ground anyone attempting to bypass the intended challenge. Clever, he admitted, as the first targeting system locked onto his aerial approach. Force everyone to engage with the obstacle rather than circumventing it entirely, but two could play that game. Heat haze, instead of maintaining visible flames, Izuku shifted to thermal manipulation that bent light and sound around his flight path. To the automated targeting systems, he simply disappeared. Their mechanical sensors couldn't lock onto a target that was generating optical distortions rather than obvious heat signatures. The technique allowed him to cross the ravine undetected, while other competitors struggled with the hanging obstacles below. But maintaining the thermal camouflage required intense concentration, and he could feel the energy drain accumulating like compound interest. Sustainable power management, he reminded himself as he touched down on the far side of the chasm. Save the big techniques for when they're actually needed. The final obstacle was the most diabolical, a minefield disguised as an innocent stretch of open ground. But these weren't explosive mines. They were paint bombs designed to mark competitors who triggered them, adding time penalties and visual hindrance that could decide the race's outcome. Izuku's enhanced senses, honed by months of devil fruit power integration, could detect the subtle temperature variations that marked buried devices. Each mine generated a tiny thermal signature different from the surrounding ground, creating a heat map that only someone with his abilities could perceive. Thermal detection versus paint mines, he analyzed as he began picking his way through the minefield with supernatural precision. This is almost unfair. Behind him, the sounds of triggered mines and frustrated competitors created a chaotic symphony. Some students were taking the brute force approach, accepting paint penalties in exchange for straight-line speed. Others were trying to find safe paths through careful observation and tactical thinking. But none of them had devil fruit-enhanced thermal perception. Izuku navigated the minefield like it was a casual stroll, his footsteps finding the narrow spaces between buried devices with machine-like precision. The crowd's excitement was building as they realized someone was actually making it through the obstacle without triggering any mines. Unbelievable, Present Mike's voice carried across the arena with genuine awe. Midoriya is threading the needle through that minefield like he has a map. How is he detecting those buried devices? Thermal analysis, Izuku thought with satisfaction. Advanced fire quirk applications that push the boundaries of what's theoretically possible but still fall within believable parameters. The finish line was visible now, just 50 meters of clear ground between him and victory. Behind him, he could hear other competitors beginning to clear the minefield through various means. Explosions, ice walls, creative quirk applications that brute forced their way through the obstacle. But he had enough of a lead that, barring catastrophic mistakes, and the winner of the obstacle race is Midoriya Izuku from Class 1A, Present Mike announced as Izuku crossed the finish line with arms raised in victory. An absolutely dominating performance that showcased creative quirk application, tactical thinking, and raw determination. The crowd's roar was deafening as he slowed to a stop, sweat streaming down his face from the sustained effort of advanced thermal manipulation. Around him, other competitors were finishing in rapid succession, Todoroki claiming second place with his typical ice and fire efficiency, Bakugo exploding across the line in third with characteristic violent enthusiasm. First place. The reality of it was almost overwhelming. After years of being dismissed as powerless, he just won the opening event of the most prestigious competition in Hero Academia, broadcast live to millions of viewers. But even as pride swelled in his chest, Izuku noticed the looks he was receiving from fellow competitors. Not just admiration or congratulation, calculation, analysis. The kind of attention that came from people trying to figure out how he'd accomplished what should have been impossible. Midoriya, Uraraka's cheerful voice cut through his worried thoughts as she jogged over with a huge grin. That was amazing. The way you flew over everyone, then disappeared from the targeting systems, then walked through that minefield like you knew exactly where every mine was hidden. Just advanced thermal manipulation, Izuku replied, the rehearsed explanation coming automatically. Fire quirks are more versatile than most people realize. Versatile is an understatement, Todoroki said quietly, appearing beside them with his characteristic directness. What you demonstrated today pushes the theoretical limits of thermal manipulation. The energy requirements alone should have been prohibitive for sustained use. Here we go, Izuku thought as more classmates gathered around them, their expressions mixing congratulation with curiosity. The questions I've been dreading. How did you detect the mines? Yaoyorozu asked with scientific precision. Thermal analysis of buried objects requires incredibly sensitive heat perception beyond what most fire quirks can achieve. And that disappearing trick, Kaminari added with obvious excitement. You just vanished from the targeting systems. How does fire manipulation create optical invisibility? Before Izuku could formulate responses that wouldn't reveal too much, Bakugo's voice cut through the group discussion like a blade. Because it's not just fire manipulation, the explosive blonde said with quiet certainty. Is it Deku? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, drawing attention from their growing audience of competitors and nearby spectators. Bakugo stepped closer, his crimson eyes blazing with the intensity that had defined their childhood relationship. I've been watching you, he continued, his voice carrying despite its low volume. Every technique, every application, every impossible thing you've done since that day you suddenly had a quirk. And you know what I've figured out? Izuku felt ice forming in his stomach, despite the warmth of his devil fruit power. Kachin, this isn't the time. You're not using a fire quirk at all, Bakugo interrupted. You're using something else entirely, something that just happens to involve heat and flames. Something that doesn't follow the same rules as genetic abilities. The group of listening students had gone silent, their attention focused on the confrontation playing out before them. In the stands, Izuku could see cameras turning their way, broadcasting equipment focusing on what was clearly becoming a dramatic moment. That's a serious accusation, Todoroki said quietly, his heterochromatic eyes studying both boys with laser intensity. Are you suggesting Midoriya has been lying about the nature of his abilities? I'm suggesting, Bakugo replied with savage satisfaction, that everything he's told us about his quirk is bullshit. Late manifestation, advanced thermal manipulation, creative applications of fire generation, all lies covering up whatever he really is. The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other competitors were stopping their own conversations to listen, drawn by the tension that was rapidly escalating beyond friendly rivalry. Izuku met Bakugo's gaze directly, seeing years of frustrated confusion and wounded pride burning behind those crimson eyes. His former friend wasn't just suspicious, he was hurt. Hurt by the implications of what Izuku's hidden power meant about their childhood relationship, about the bullying, about everything that had defined their dynamic for so long. My quirk is thermal manipulation with flame generation, Izuku said carefully, sticking to the technical description they'd registered with UA. Everything I did today falls within those parameters. Bullshit, Bakugo repeated, but with less conviction than before. The energy output alone is consistent with an exceptionally powerful fire-type quirk, Todoroki interrupted, though his tone suggested he was thinking through implications rather than defending Izuku. Rare, but not unprecedented. My father's flame abilities operate on similar scales. The mention of Endeavor created a ripple effect through their audience. If the number 2 hero's son was vouching for the plausibility of Izuku's techniques, that carried significant weight among their peers. But Izuku could see Bakugo wasn't convinced. If anything, Todoroki's defense only seemed to fuel his suspicion that something deeper was being hidden. Before the confrontation could escalate further, Present Mike's voice boomed across the arena. All right, competitors, time to announce the second event. Gather round for the next challenge that will determine who advances to the finals. The crowd began moving toward the central announcement area, but Bakugo caught Izuku's arm as they walked. This isn't over, he said quietly, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. I don't care what Todoroki says or what the official records claim. I know you're hiding something and I'm going to figure out what. Kachin, don't. Bakugo's voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotional pain underneath his anger. Just don't lie to me anymore. Whatever you really are, whatever happened to give you that power, I can handle the truth better than I can handle being treated like I'm too stupid to notice the inconsistencies. He released Izuku's arm and stalked away before any response was possible, leaving behind a wake of uncomfortable questions and worried expressions from their observing classmates. He's right, Izuku realized with sinking certainty. The lies are hurting him more than the truth would, but the truth would hurt everyone else. As they gathered for Present Mike's announcement of the second event, Izuku found himself surrounded by friends and classmates whose trust he was systematically betraying. Uraraka's cheerful support, Iida's formal respect, Todoroki's growing interest in collaboration, all of it built on foundations that would crumble the moment his real secret was revealed. Devil Fruit user masquerading as quirk wielder. The phrase echoed in his mind as Present Mike began explaining the cavalry battle that would determine who advanced to the tournament finals. How long before someone figures it out completely? In the VIP section, he could see All Might's muscle form watching with what appeared to be paternal pride, but Izuku knew his mentor was probably as worried as he was about the scrutiny his performance was attracting. First place in the obstacle race means a target on my back for the cavalry battle, he realized as Present Mike announced the point values. 10 million points for the winning team, which means everyone will be coming after me specifically. But as he looked around at his classmates, some offering partnership, others already calculating how to defeat him, all of them treating him as an equal competitor rather than a powerless nobody, Izuku felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with devil fruit power. Let them come, he thought as flames began dancing around his fingers in anticipation of the next challenge. I've spent too long hiding what I can do. Time to show them what the boy who ate impossible fruit has really become. The sports festival was far from over, and already his carefully maintained secrets were under attack from multiple directions. But for the first time since eating that mysterious fruit on a garbage-strewn beach, Izuku found himself looking forward to the confrontation. Truth or lies, quirk or devil fruit, it doesn't matter, he decided as Present Mike called for team formation to begin. I'm going to prove I belong here, whatever the cost. The flames dancing around his hands pulsed with determination as he prepared for the next phase of competition. Around him, potential teammates and enemies alike were making their own calculations about power, strategy, and the mysterious fire user who had just dominated the most prestigious race in Hero Academia. 10 million points on my head, Izuku thought with dark satisfaction. This should be interesting. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.